You've probably walked past a security guard without a second thought. Nodded maybe. Kept walking. You trust the uniform before you trust the person wearing it. Because that's what a uniform is for. It's a shortcut your brain takes so it doesn't have to evaluate every stranger from scratch. At 1:24 in the morning on March 18, 1990, that exact shortcut is the only reason the largest unsolved art theft in modern history was even possible. Two men in Boston police uniforms rang a side buzzer at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, told the guard on duty they were responding to a disturbance call, and were let inside a building holding some of the most valuable paintings on Earth. Because the guard on duty that night did exactly what almost anyone would have done. He trusted the uniform first and asked questions never. To understand why this heist unfolded the way it did, you have to understand the woman whose name is on the building. Isabella Stewart Gardner was a wealthy Bostonian who spent decades of the late 1800s and early 1900s traveling Europe and buying art. Not through dealers alone, but often through personal relationships with artists and scholars who helped her build one of the most important private collections in America. She wasn't just collecting for status. She built an entire Venetian-style palace, Fenway Court, specifically to house the collection the way she wanted it experienced. Room by room, arrangement by arrangement, as a single, deliberate work of art in itself. And when she died in 1924, she left a will with one condition that would end up mattering more than anyone could have guessed. Nothing in the museum could ever be added, removed, or rearranged. If the museum's board violated that clause, the entire collection would be sold off and the proceeds handed to Harvard. That single sentence in a 100-year-old will is the reason this story ends the way it does. Now, back to that night. The two guards on duty were 23-year-old Rick Abath and a colleague, both part-time employees, both unarmed, working under a security setup with one glaring, almost unbelievable flaw. The museum's only direct alarm to outside police was a panic button located at the front desk, meaning the system only worked if a guard happened to be standing at that exact desk when something went wrong. The men at the door, dressed as Boston police, asked Abath to step away from the desk to let them in. He did, and the moment he did, the entire security plan for one of the most valuable private art collections in the world collapsed, because there was now nobody positioned where the one alarm that mattered could actually be reached. Here's a detail that investigators would spend years turning over. Security footage from the night before the robbery showed someone else being buzzed through those same two locked doors in a strikingly similar way. Someone who, under the museum's own protocol, should never have been let in unannounced. It turned out to be the museum's own deputy chief of security, according to former guards who came forward once the FBI asked the public to help identify the figure. A coincidence, most investigators concluded. But it's the kind of detail that, 30 years later, still makes people who've studied this case pause. What happened next took 81 minutes, and every minute of it is documented because, in a small irony that still stings the investigators who've spent 3 decades on this case, the museum's own motion detectors recorded the thieves' exact movements through the building in real time. A time-stamped map of the crime as it happened that nobody could act on until it was already over. The men handcuffed both guards, wrapped duct tape around their eyes and mouths, and led them to the basement, where they'd stay chained to a workbench pipe for the next several hours. Then the thieves went to work. And here's where the story stops making sense in a way that has bothered art crime investigators for 3 decades. They didn't take the most valuable thing in the room. In the Dutch room, they cut Rembrandt's only known seascape, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, directly out of its frame with a knife. Not carefully unhooked, not removed with any preservation technique, just sliced from the canvas edge, damaging the painting in the process. They took Vermeer's The Concert, one of only 34 known Vermeer paintings in existence, making it, painting for painting, one of the rarest objects a private individual could possibly hold. They took a Rembrandt self-portrait etching, a Govert Flinck landscape, and 5 Degas works on paper. Then, in the short gallery, they tried to pry open a display case holding a gilded bronze eagle finial that once topped a Napoleonic flag, and when the case wouldn't open, instead of moving on, they unscrewed the finial from the flagpole beside it and took that instead, leaving the sealed case, and everything more valuable inside it, completely untouched. 30 feet away, in the same room, hung a Titian worth by some estimates more than everything else they stole combined. They didn't touch it. That detail is the reason so many theories about this case exist, and none of them have ever been proven. A professional art thief working for a wealthy private buyer would typically know exactly what to take and how to remove a canvas without wrecking it. These men cut paintings out with what conservators later called almost reckless efficiency, and skipped objects a knowledgeable thief would have grabbed first. It's led to two very different working theories over the decades. One says this was never really about the art at all, that stolen masterpieces this recognizable can function as a kind of criminal currency, traded quietly between organized crime figures as collateral or leverage, valuable specifically because they can never be sold, only held. The other theory says it was simpler and dumber than that whoever did this had a list, wasn't an art expert, and just didn't know what they were looking at. Investigators still don't agree on which one is closer to true. At 2:45 a.m., 81 minutes after they arrived, the thieves left through the same side door they'd entered, carrying what would eventually be valued at $500 million in stolen work, and drove away. The guards weren't found until museum staff arrived for the morning shift. By then, whatever trail existed outside the building was already cold. And this is where 30 years of investigation should have produced an answer, and instead produced almost nothing that's ever been proven in court. The case went quiet for nearly 2 decades. Then, on the 23rd anniversary of the theft, in March 2013, the FBI held a press conference that made international headlines. The special agent in charge of the Boston field office announced that investigators believed they had identified the thieves, describing them as members of a criminal organization with a base spanning the mid-Atlantic states and New England. It sounded, for a moment, like the case was finally cracking open. Then came the part nobody expected. The FBI said the trail led to the Philadelphia and Connecticut area, that some individuals believed to be involved were already dead, and that, even with all of that, they still could not say where the paintings physically were. Knowing who, in other words, is not the same as knowing where, and the location is the only part of this that actually matters. Rick Abath, the guard who buzzed the thieves in, never fully escaped the spotlight of his own case. He always maintained he had nothing to do with the robbery beyond being duped like anyone else would have been, and an early FBI review reportedly concluded the guards themselves likely lacked the capability to have pulled it off. But in 2013, when Abath spoke to the Boston Globe about where he personally stood after more than 2 decades, he said federal investigators had told him directly that they had never been able to eliminate him as a suspect. Not charged, not cleared, just permanently, officially unresolved. A man who has spent more than 30 years being the only living person known for certain to have been inside that building the night it happened, and who still, by the government's own account, remains a maybe. The reward for information leading to the painting's safe return, no questions asked about who's returning them, has grown over the decades to $10 million, one of the largest ever offered for stolen property in history. And still, nothing verifiable. No tip that's panned out publicly. No recovered canvas. Not even a confirmed photograph of any of the 13 missing works since the night they vanished. Which brings us back to Isabella Stewart Gardner's will, the clause that nothing in the museum could ever be moved or rearranged. Because of that legal condition, the museum staff made a decision that, on the surface, looks almost theatrical, and is actually one of the more quietly devastating choices any museum has ever made. They didn't fill the gaps. They didn't rehang other paintings over the empty spaces. They put the empty frames back exactly where the stolen paintings used to hang, and left them there. Today, more than 3 decades later, if you walk into the Dutch room at the Gardner Museum, you will see a rectangular void in an ornate gold frame, exactly where Rembrandt's only seascape used to be. It isn't neglect, it's a promise, encoded into a dead woman's will and kept every single day since. This space is still waiting, because someday the paintings might come back, and when they do, they need somewhere to go. Every year the case stays open, a few more variables disappear. Witnesses age and die. Abath himself died in 2024, having spent his entire adult life as the one person who knew exactly what happened at that door and never, by his own account, told the full story to anyone's satisfaction. Evidence degrades. The physical world where the paintings might be hidden, a private collection, a storage unit, a wall in someone's home who has no idea what they're looking at, keeps shrinking the odds with every year nobody involved talks. And there's a documented pattern in cases exactly like this one. Masterpieces this famous become almost impossible to sell. No legitimate buyer will touch a Vermeer the entire art world can identify on sight. Which means, in cases like this, stolen work often just sits, somewhere, in the dark. Worth $500 million and worth nothing at all to whoever is holding it, because using it, selling it, or even showing it to anyone is the one thing guaranteed to end with a knock on the door. So somewhere, in an attic, a vault, a storage locker paid for in cash every month by someone who's forgotten why, there may be a painting by one of the greatest artists who ever lived, rolled up, hidden, worthless to hold, and impossible to sell, guarded by nothing but the silence of whoever put it there. And back in Boston, in a museum that legally cannot change a single thing about itself, an empty gold frame is still hanging exactly where a 350-year-old seascape used to be. Not because anyone forgot to fix it, but because somebody is still waiting for it to come home.